Today we're doing something once again that we haven't done in a while, a draw preview, this time of the Indian Wells Tennis Tournament, also known as the 5th Grand Slam. It's going to be a big tournament, the first big tournament since the Australian Open. We'll be going section by section, not being too long, trying to keep it brief. First up, we've got Zverev taking over the spot as the first seed, as Jannik Sinner is currently on a 3-month suspension. He'll be facing the winner of Kecmanovic versus Griekspoor. And Zverev has not been in great form, and these two players have. So watch out, Zverev could be on upset alert in that first round. And Petri Pericard facing Morozhin versus Or Martinez. Petri Pericard, all of his players haven't been playing great tennis recently. I wouldn't be surprised if Zverev does get upset, which likely, he might actually turn it up a bit for this tournament because he has lost in Buenos Aires, in Rio, in Acapulco very early on. I wouldn't be surprised if Kecmanovic or Griekspoor make it all the way through to the 4th round, where they'll be meeting either Mahac, Bautista Agut, or Tiafoe, or a couple qualifiers. Mahac won his first ever tournament in Acapulco last week. He might be the form player out of this group of players. That being said, I'll say it'll be Kecmanovic versus Mahac in the 4th round, and we'll be seeing Mahac in the quarterfinals of Indian Wells. In the next section, we got Rune, Mutet, Jordan Thompson. I've got Holger Rune. I think he wants to make up for last week where he was sick. You know what? His game is coming back slowly. He'll be facing either Humbert, Muna, or Nishikori. Humbert. The surface this year is a bit faster at Indian Wells. They're using the same surface as Miami and the US Open. Of course, the conditions, the desert, keep it slow, but just picking a bit of a boring option there. Going for a Rune, Humbert 3rd round, where I will pick Rune. And we got Berrettini, Tsitsipas, Cabez Baena, Chris O'Connell, Seyboth Wild, and Muller. Tsitsipas came back last week. Apparently, he's using a painted version of a Babolat Pure Aero Drive 98, a similar racket to Auger Aliassime and Carlos Alcaraz. In this section, it's hard to pick Tsitsipas, but I don't see Seyboth Wild could put up a fight against Tsitsipas, but I want to keep some faith into him considering he won just a few days ago. If he does beat Seyboth Wild, I don't see any reason why Berrettini would beat Tsitsipas. You know what? I'm going to pick Tsitsipas to make the 4th round, where he is going to lose to Holger Rune. A few contenders who can really, battle with Berrettini and Tsitsipas, and you never know with those two players, a pretty similar level. But Tsitsipas, he won last week, so I will back him to reach the 4th round, but I reckon Holger Rune will make up for being sick last week in Acapulco. And this is a pretty poor section, you have to say. I thought Opelka was actually sick. Maybe he's recovered in time for Indian Wells. Casper Ruud versus Giron, or a qualifier. Casper Ruud, not his best conditions, but, I'll back him to at least win a match here, where he will likely face either Zizou Bergs, a qualifier, or Popperin as a winner of the Toronto Masters last year. I forgot which one, Canadian Masters. He's been playing atrocious tennis, really bad tennis this year so far. Casper Ruud, just based on the, Zizou Bergs could do something, but it's a pretty poor section. I'll back Casper Ruud to win a couple matches, where he will likely face Fils, Musetti, Safudian, Opelka, Zhang. Slower conditions. I would like to see what Musetti can do in these slower conditions. But that being said, I think Fils might have a game here to be able to trouble a few players. A bit of power. He can generate quite a bit of power on a slower surface. Musetti, a bit too passive. But when he unleashes on those ground strokes, he can cause a bit of trouble. Opelka, it's a bit too slow for my liking, but you know what? He's had a pretty good start to the year. I'll stick with Fils to reach the 4th round against Casper Ruud, where I will pick Arthur Fils. And Arthur Fils always lets me down when I pick him, but this time around, I might just do that. Tommy Paul, Vukic, Boyer, Tristan Boyer, Cameron Norrie, Nardi, Lehechka. A lot of good players in this section. Be boring once again, and pick Lehechka and Tommy Paul to be facing each other. Cam Norrie, former Indian Wells champion, but Lehechka is in great form, as is Vukic from the Australian Open. It's actually a pretty hard section, but if anything, I could see Vukic and Norrie or Nardi, of course, who beat Djokovic last year at Indian Wells. You know what? Anyone could actually reach the 4th round of this section, but Tommy Paul played pretty well here last year, and I have to stick with him. It's a bit boring, but I think we're set for another Medvedev versus Tommy Paul matchup at Indian Wells. They had a great match last year, another great match at Miami, I believe. It's a bit boring, but it's hard to pick Cam Norrie, so out of form. Lehechka could do it, but I think he's a bit too, I don't know. slow. You need a bit more movement on this court. Moving on, gloss over Mickelson. His first real crack at Indian Wells. Medvedev is due for a bit of a run. That being said, I do see Tommy Paul, stopping him again. Not again, but stopping him before he can actually make a really deep run into a tournament. Tommy Paul through to the quarterfinals there. And just briefly, before we forget who we actually picked, we'll just pick our finalist all the way from this top section, change it up a bit. So we said we'll have Kecmanovic versus Mahac, and Mahac through. So Mahac versus Holger Rune. A lot more confident in Mahac if he were to reach that stage. Of course, better the favourite in that section, but I would not be surprised at all if the informed Mahac would reach a semi-final at Indian Wells. And moving down, we said Arthur Fields versus Tommy Paul. I'm going to stick with Tommy Paul. The American home crowd might see him through to a semi-final. You have a pretty weak semi-final between Tommy Paul and Thomas Mahac, two of the same first names, more or less. And I'm going to stick with my boy, Thomas Mahac, to reach his first ever Masters 1000 final. And it's a big pick. We might end up blowing in my face, and a Musetti or a Tsitsipas or Berrettini could reach the final very easily. Or, of course, the obvious pick is Zverev to turn around his fortunes and reach a final for once. I'll stay with Mahac as my pick to reach the final of Indian Wells in the top half. The bottom half is a bit more interesting. We've got Kovacevic and Arnaldi, winner versus Rublev. And Arnaldi could cause some troubles, but his level has fallen off. Rublev, coming off that win in Doha, lost last week in Dubai. But given his level of play in Doha, I'll back him to beat a Nakashima in the third round to reach the fourth round where, in my opinion, he might be facing, that's right, Lerner Tien and Menchik will each beat Khachanov and Ben Shelton. Ben Shelton might actually overpower Lerner Tien, but I'm going to back him just off the fact that he's playing such good tennis recently. I think that Menchik is going to win that matchup, regardless of if it's against Ben Shelton or Lerner Tien. And that means we have Jakub Menchik versus Rublev in the fourth round. And Rublev is not a great player against these next-gen ATP players. And that's why I'm going to pick Menchik to reach the quarterfinal. And who does Menchik play in that quarterfinal? We got Jake Draper versus Jacob Fernley and Al Fonseca. Wow, what a matchup. I will back Fonseca to beat Jacob Fernley. No easy beat Fernley, but Jack Draper versus Fonseca, what a matchup. And I think that Fonseca has the tools to dismantle Jack Draper. On this surface, he can overpower. It sounds weird, but Fonseca can outgrind and then outlast and eventually outpower and outstrength Draper, who struggles in the desert, struggles in the heat, struggles in a lot of climates. Fonseca will face Felix in the third round. Felix has been having a very good season so far. A couple titles, reached the final of Dubai, and Fonseca to reach the fourth round. A bit of a following the hype train. Perhaps Felix should be backed here. That being said, I don't see him reaching beyond the fourth round because I see Taylor Fritz having a bit of a comeback tournament here. A bit of a favourable draw. You got Tabilio, you got Lajovic, you got Sebastian Baez coming off a title in Rio and a final in Santiago. But yeah, Taylor Fritz, I see him in his home tournament, won it 3 years back, and he can really get his year, kick-started from here onwards in tennis paradise. Taylor Fritz to reach the quarterfinals there. Let's just say it now. Taylor Fritz versus Andrei Rublev. And I'm going to back Taylor Fritz to reach the final here. Rublev, he really struggles to have good performances in succession. Of course, that was 2 weeks ago, but more or less. I wouldn't be surprised if, given Rublev's recent history, he doesn't really have a good tournament until Madrid, Rome, So we'll see. Moving down, the section everyone is talking about. Novak Djokovic will be facing Alex de Minaur. No, okay. Nick Kyrgios, if he wins his first round match against a qualifier, which is easier said than done, he'll be facing his Brisbane doubles partner, Novak Djokovic. And as the 6th seed, Djokovic is once again not in a favourable position given the draw. And it's a very, very tough draw. Not only do you have Kyrgios first, or a qualifier, which, I'll back Djokovic to avenge that loss from 8 years ago. But you then have to face Davidovich Fokina or Cerundolo. And Fokina, he's coming off a couple finals in this American swing at the Delray Beach Open and last week at Acapulco. Cerundolo playing some decent tennis in this golden swing on the clay courts. I would be more scared of Fokina, but Fokina can't beat Djokovic Cerundolo, maybe he can. But Djokovic, I think, is a bit more locked in this year compared to last in this tournament. And he's got Andy Murray in his corner. I don't see him losing before the fourth round at the earliest, where you got Dimonor, you got Hurkacz, you got a pretty, strong selection of players. Sonego, it's a bit of a tough pick here. Dimonor, very slow courts for him. Do they suit him? He lacks the power to play well on these courts. Hurkacz, the Polish hammer, might be able to outlast Dimonor, and an early exit, Dimonor falling down to 10th in the world. That's what happens. You face tougher opponents like Hurkacz in the third round of a Masters tournament. So I have Hurkacz and Djokovic in the fourth round, and I don't think Djokovic should struggle all too much against Hurkacz in such conditions. But Djokovic as well needs to keep that power up, because last year became far too passive against Nardi, and he had the worst performance of his season, arguably. Moving down, we have Dimitrov facing in a section against Nuno Borges, Rinderknech, Korda, Monfils, Struff, Shapovalov, Quinton Halys, Alcaraz. Just looking at the bottom there, Halys had a great tournament last week in Dubai. Not an easy match for Alcaraz first up, but I expect Alcaraz to dispatch of him 4-4 or so, especially even though Shapovalov has been pretty good recently. Won the tournament earlier this year. Won a couple tournaments actually in recent times. Alcaraz just has the wood over Shapovalov, and I don't see Shapovalov having any sort of resistance against Alcaraz, and that's why I see Alcaraz easily making it to the fourth round, where he'll be likely facing, it's really hard to say, Dimitrov has been injured this whole season. Korda has been playing average at best. You got Monfils, you got Rinderknech, you got Nuno Borges. I say Nuno Borges takes out an injured Dimitrov, where you move on to Monfils, likely beating Struff. Korda, I'll back Korda to reach the fourth round, I believe. He can beat Borges, he can beat Monfils or Struff. So Alcaraz, I think it's a pretty easy section, even though there's a lot of big names. None of them are in form all too much, apart from Shapovalov. And so Djokovic, Alcaraz quarterfinal, I think this has become Alcaraz's tournament. And given that Djokovic beat him in the Australian Open, I feel like it'll be really hard to back it up. It would be Alcaraz's first win on a hard court against Djokovic, and Djokovic has that in his mind. He doesn't want to give up that mental edge over Alcaraz on a hard court. So I say that Alcaraz wins, but it'll be a very tight battle if it were to occur. After last year, I lack a bit of confidence in him at this tournament, but Andy Murray in his corner always makes me a bit more confident for his chances. Yeah, I reckon Alcaraz versus Fritz in that semi-final, even though Fritz will have a nice little run here, Alcaraz will dispatch him on these slightly faster courts compared to normal. Of course, he's the two-time defending champion. So yeah, Alcaraz versus Thomas Mahac, and it's a really boring pick. Alcaraz to dispatch of Thomas Mahac in straight sets. And once again, I think that quarterfinal against Djokovic might decide the tournament. Of course, the popcorn match is that first round or second round match between Djokovic and Kyrgios potentially. I'm not that confident in picking Alcaraz. I think it could be any player that's slightly in form. It's quite hard to pick, especially given the Jannik Sinner ban. We'll see. Let me know in the comments down below who you believe will win. And enjoy the tournament, and until next time.